I'm Matt, and this is my garage. Got a couple of Lotus in here, I got a Viper behind me, and you could say, or to say I like cars, kind of an understatement. But I gotta warn you, not a master mechanic, not a certified technician. And I took automotive in high school. How about that? Does that qualify me? But hey man, I've been working on cars since, I was like 14 years old. Loved it, right? Tore apart my first Alfa Romeo engine at 14 in my parents' garage. Didn't get it back together again, but did a hell of a job tearing it apart. So latest project, Lotus Esprit. I've taken some videos. I gotta warn you, some are good, and some not so good. So yeah, with that, let's take a look at the motor. It's hiding over here in the corner. All right. There she blows. All right, so here's a motor I'm going to be talking about for a little while. It's almost done. Not quite. I still need to set the cam timing, and I've got vernier pulleys on here. I've never really used vernier pulleys before, so I got to figure out how to set the cam timing with vernier pulleys. I'm doing a little reading. I'll figure it out, and yeah, I think I'll figure it out. But back to the motor. So, rebuilding a motor is a lot of work, man. Jeez, taking it apart's fun. Like, I love tearing stuff apart, right? That's fun, that's easy, and you can knock that out pretty fast. And then you go start to rebuild it, right? You send the block out. You're gonna get machined. You send the head. Well, all right. You send the block out, right? Before you can send the head out, you got to buy a bunch of parts for the head so they can rebuild your head for you. But you can get the block out and get, well, that's really about it. So a lot of times you're waiting for things to come back, and while you're waiting for things to come back, that's when I tackle a lot of the smaller pieces, the painting, like stuff you don't think about, like a pulley, right? Like a bracket. Hell, a bolt. There's when you go to put the motor together, you got a bucket full of bolts. If you kept them all, that is. You got a couple choices. You can put the old bolts on. Looks like crap. Don't want to do that. You could clean them up and paint them. Again, don't want to do that. That's a pain in the ass. You can buy all new bolts, or you can send them out and you can have them coated. But any one of those takes time. Because if you're going to buy new bolts, you still got to catalog all your bolts, so you buy the right bolts, and you know how many of each one to buy. Because I guarantee it, man, you're going to put the motor together, you're going to be missing something. And when you miss something, then you just gotta wait. So, yeah. All that being said, it was fun build. Even hoses, I was getting ready to wrap up the motor, and I'm going to put the hoses back on the intake, and I look in my box that I stored everything in, or threw everything in when I took the motor apart, and all my hoses look like crap. And they were, I just didn't think to order any ahead of time. So then I had to figure out the diameters of all my hoses and order my hoses and wait some more, and then the hoses come in, and you gotta have, what about silly hose clamps, right? You're gonna just go down to Advanced Auto and buy some American hose clamps? Ha! Well, you could, but I'm stupid like that, so I wanted metric hose clamps. Then you got to find them online. You got to order those. You got to wait for them to come in, and then holy cow, you get all that done. Then you got a wiring harness, right? Have you seen what a 30-year-old wiring harness looks like when it comes off a car? Man. So you're certainly not going to put that back on. let alone half my wires were so brittle, I just bent them and they'd snap, right? And well, some had snapped already, which is why I guess the car wasn't running when the previous guy sold it to me. Might have something to do with it. Yeah, so then you got new wires, and then, you know, you got new pigtail connections, and you got new boots, and then you got to get all the shrink wrap for the wiring harness, and not just one size, right? You got to have like 5 different sizes if you want it to look good. So, man, yeah, I'm bitching. But I wouldn't trade it, right? Yeah, for me it's a hobby, you know? It's a hobby. For me, it relieves stress. And, you know, these things aren't just cars, man. To me, it's like rolling art. So I really enjoy it. So, hey, I'm going to shut up. Let's take a look at the first video. Is not really a video. It's pictures when I was taking the motor apart. I didn't start doing videos till I started building the engine. But anyway, let's run through that, and you'll kind of get a good understanding of where I started from. Cool? Well, there you go. You kind of see what I started with, right? Dirty engine. Car didn't look that bad, but it's a lot worse than it looked. So, yeah, a couple photos there of taking it apart, some of the things I noticed. Really weird, man. The auxiliary sprocket had been spinning out over the Woodruff key there on the auxiliary oil shaft, and just kind of welded that thing to the shaft and wore it down and just gouged away at the inside of the pulley, and man, it was bad news. So I had to replace all that. Anyway, so yeah, and you saw a little bit of the build-up, right? Hadn't done much, just put the water pump on, the oil pump on, stuff like that. So now I got some videos that kind of go into building the block, and man, they're not, you know, I went back, I looked at them. If you're looking for enthusiasm, man, they're not that animated, so I apologize. You know, I'm going to do better when I start doing the cam carriers and some other cool stuff on the motor. But anyway, I guess grin and bear it, right? Was waiting for some new compression rings, #1 ring, got those in. So I'm ready to install. You want to be careful you don't scratch the piston as you're getting these on. And then also notice your ring gaps. You want to make sure that you're not putting ring gaps in parallel down the piston. You want to get good separation between all those gaps. And I think one thing I'll do before I go any farther is just put one in the engine over here. Just make sure it's gap correctory. And what I do is I'll just take a ring, compress it a little bit, put it in the cylinder, and put a feeler gauge on it, see what I get, compare that to the spec book. So let's do that. Right, according to the service manual, need to be about 0.02 0.02, I think it was. 0.026 to 0.059. So I'm going to put one of these in here and see what I get. I want to get it as close to the top as you can, so you know it's square in the bore. And then I'm just going to pick a feeler gauge here. Probably start with 0.032. All right, it doesn't fit. Let me go all the way down to 0.024. It's pretty close. That's 0.4. That's it, 0.0. That's 0.406 millimeters. Yeah, and that's right within tolerance. So we're good. Might as well check these other ones real quick. Yeah. All right, they're all good. Now these things come pre-gapped, but you know it doesn't hurt to go ahead and check them anyway. We'll slide the rest of these on. Okay, next thing we got to look out for when we put them into the bore, cylinder bore, we want to make sure that we get them numbered correctly, number 1 to 4 front to back, and on the top of the piston there's a little arrow, and that arrow needs to point toward the front of the engine. So the side, you know, the front with the water pump. I use a ring compressor to just slide the piston in. We're going to tighten it up. It'll compress the rings, allow us to tap the pistons into place in the bore. Make sure you get a lot of, don't be afraid to soak them in oil when you put them in the cylinder liner. I like to put oil around the inside of the cylinder liner and then really soak the pistons in oil before I slide them in there, so I know they're nice and lubricated, ready to go. All right, we're going to put some pistons in the motor. Well, before I do that, I just want to get a quick measurement on the bearing clearance. And to do that, I need a plastic gauge. Use plastic gauge to measure that. And the way that works is these strips will come in handy, and we'll go through using those. But basically, there's just a little piece of plastic wire in there, and you cut a little piece out, and you put it between the bearing and the crankshaft, and you put your piston in, tighten it down, and take it apart again, and then go ahead and measure the thickness that particular plastic wire squashed to. So, and that's what these gauges are on here. It looks like a ruler. Well, those are different thicknesses. So after that plastic wire squishes, you just run this along it till you find a width that matches, and that'll tell you your clearance. So for this motor, I'm looking at static clearance for the big side of the rods. It's 0.025 to 0.081 millimeters. So let's throw one in, see how we do. Alright, right now I'm going to put the bearings on the connecting rod before I put it in. And when you get your bearings, open them up and look at them. If you see any kind of scratches at all on the bearing surface, send them back, get a new set. I've gotten so many of these in the past that when I open up a brand new box of bearings, you know, I get scratches on the inside. And sometimes if they're not wrapped well, they can bounce around in the container and then get stretched up as well. So just because they're new doesn't mean they're good. Like I said. Try to get it square the best you can. If it's not, your rings stand a chance of popping out when you go to tap the piston in. By the way, I got new connecting rods. These are lightweight aluminum rods. Got these from Gary Kemp on the internet. So ordinarily you want to cover this up with a piece of rubber or something as you put it in. I don't really have anything to put over it right now, so I'm just going to be super careful when I put it in to make sure it doesn't knock into any of the bearing surfaces or the cylinder wall. When you put them in, make sure if you look on the front of the piston, you probably can't see it. Right on the top of the piston there's an arrow, and that's going to point toward the front of the motor. So I'm going to make sure that that's going in the right direction. Right, here's where the plastic gauge comes in. I'm going to take my gloves off for this. So I'm going to plastic gauge this before I put the assembly lube on it. Just got a little bit of oil. I want to make sure I get a good reading. Alright, so I'm opening up the plastic gauge, and inside there's what looks like a little piece of string. Just want to take that, place it down, on the crankshaft. And then carefully put your bearing over it, your cap over it. Now we just need to torque it down. Take it apart. See what we get. These are ARP connecting rod bolts, so it says to torque to 55 foot-pounds. Now we get to take it apart. Tell you what's tough about this. I'm a little fearful of this. After I take these bolts out, getting the cap back off can be tough because it's just sitting on there. It's seated so well. You don't really have any leverage in getting it off either. So we'll see how it goes. Try to tap it with a rubber mallet. There we go. I also want to make sure I don't lose that plastic gauge. We've got a plastic little pry bar. Right. I'm going to bring the camera over so you guys can see this. Alright, here's that number 1 that I used the plastic gauge on, and I'm going to get close here. You can see that it looks like a green smear on the crankshaft. That's the plastic gauge after it's been sort of crushed by the connecting rod cap. So now we just need to measure that and see if we're in spec. Alright, here's my little piece of plastic gauge. Make sure we're looking at millimeters. What I want to do is just line this up. Looks pretty close right there. So that says 0.051. Yeah, so that's it for this time around. Next time we're going to be putting the head on the motor and putting cam carriers on and start getting into some valve timing and messing around with shims and checking clearances and all that fun stuff. So look for another one soon. All right? See ya.